So what I realized was I have a lot to learn about business, but I can go into an organization and tell you what's wrong. It's almost like an intelligence officer looking at Soviet Union stuff. I know what's wrong here. There's no maintenance. There's no leadership. They don't have a plan. All the things that I'm doing now at ExecHQ, I learned there because it's so easy to figure out where you have problems. And the biggest problem is leadership. And it's something that isn't taught well, is that it's not taught in a civilian world.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today, Jeff is interviewing Baron Lukas. Baron is an executive leader, advisor, coach, and retired Marine Corps colonel. He has 42 years of leadership, management, and mentoring experience. His professional career spans a diverse spectrum of positions, including fighter pilot, instructor, strategist, intelligence officer, professor, commander, business executive, entrepreneur, board member, and advisor. Baron is a principal at ExecHQ, a consulting firm comprised of more than 100 senior executives with extensive C-suite experience. You can learn more about Baron at exechq.com/leadership. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Baron.
Baron, I'd like to welcome you to the Corporate Couch today.
Jeff, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk to you. We met probably back in June through an introduction from ExecHQ and the CEO founder, Jim Hogat, and he was the first person I was introduced to as part of that team. And you've probably been the person I've talked to the most, even more than Jim. So thank you for coming on. So you got that going for you.
My pleasure. Right.
We're going to get into Baron's career, but he spent 27 years as an officer in the U.S. Marines, and I'd like to just thank him for his service, and we're going to get into his career there, but just a phenomenal, protecting our freedom. So thank you for that.
Thank you for paying the bills for 27 years. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, but I'm sure. So, Baron, let me ask you, I always start with a kind of a fun question. What's, even that people know you fairly well, what one thing would surprise them about you?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I think I come off as rather intimidating and stern, but that's what I've been told. This is my resting bitchy face, you see. So this is it. I was born this way. I'm actually a real softy at heart. I love animals. I own a ranch. I got more animals than I know what to do with. I love to cook. I'm actually a real sensitive family kind of guy, dressed in a crusty old body.
Yeah, so we don't use the video portion of the podcast yet, but if you look at Baron, my description would be he's a badass. So,
but old badass.
Now I have to ask you, since you brought it up, what's your favorite meal to cook?
I make a great Hungarian goulash. I do a mean smoked salmon with a whiskey honey sauce.
Oh, nice.
The whiskey is a key to a lot of things I do, by the way.
Outside of food prep.
Exactly. Well, you always use whiskey in your meals, and sometimes you actually put it in the meals. And then at Christmas, I'm a big baker. I grew up in Germany. Well, I was a child in Germany, living mostly with my grandmother. It was my mother died when I was 4, so she taught me how to bake when I was a kid, and I still do it today. Some things never leave you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to stay on this food topic because I know it's the corporate couch, but it's work is life and life is work. vice
Absolutely.
versa. But why is there not, at least in the cities I have lived in, why is there not a lot of German restaurants?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know if German food has proven to be that popular. And you're right. I'm thinking about German restaurants in America that I've been to. There've been very few, and even fewer that are good. And so you can go to an Italian restaurant on any street corner, particularly in the Northeast, obviously, but Chinese and all that stuff, Japanese. I
Mhm.
don't know. Really good German food is really good.
Yeah,
It just depends on where you have it. And if you haven't been to Germany or Austria and having some of that food in a really nice small country restaurant, you haven't had it yet. So it's difficult to tell. People are not as familiar with the foods, but they're more familiar with the things that are more popular, pizza, that kind
yeah,
of stuff.
sure. Um, Now, you grew up in Germany, you said?
I moved when I was 9 and a half in 1968.
Okay,
So no, I didn't grow up there, but I was a child there. And
okay.
my father made me speak German to him the entire time after we moved, so I wouldn't lose the German. And it was a very Germanic household, meaning I'm always 5 or 10 minutes early to everything, that kind of Prussian heritage background. And I've been back to Germany several times. I lived there for 3 years when I was in the military. I'm still very much German underneath,
Nice.
whatever that means to you. By the way,
Right.
that my definition would be different than yours, but
Right. What what did you like doing as a child growing up? What was fun for you?
this will make you laugh. I think I loved cowboy movies. Remember Bonanza?
Oh yeah,
And
the
and
Ponderosa.
there's absolutely. And there are a number of other shows in that same era that I know the German title, not the American title, but I grew. I mean, when I was a child, there was this fantasy world where I would, strap on a 6 shooter and go get on a horse. And now that I'm 64, I have a ranch. I've got horses, and I got several 6 shooters. So I guess all things come to those who wait.
There you go. Well, yeah, that John Wayne, the
Yeah,
John Wayne movies were, big at the
absolutely.
time.
Yeah. My father and I used to laugh and joke about it that I learned English watching John Wayne movies
Yeah.
because literally, we both came in. He was God, how old was he? 40 something, and I was 9. And so when he was home and I was not in school, we watched John Wayne movies. He loved them, I loved them, and so there was probably a little bit of influence on young Baron Lucas back then. And here I am wearing a cowboy hat. So here you go.
Yeah. For you younger listeners, just go to Wikipedia and type in John Wayne.
The Duke, as opposed to the
The
Baron.
Duke, yeah. And we're not talking about the NFL official football, the Duke. I would ask if you have a John Wayne impersonation, but that might be getting too much.
That's way too much. I do have. It's funny. I have a John Wayne suite. I'm upstairs in the ranch house, and there's a suite right across the hallway here that's got living room, bedroom, bathroom, and it's called the John Wayne suite. But that was my father's favorite movie star. So the whole thing is John Wayne themed inside.
Oh wow, love
There you
it.
go. Duke is still alive in my house.
That's I love it. What was your aspiration as a kid when I want to be this when I'm an adult? What was this for you?
Right when I moved to the United States, and I didn't speak a word of English. My father and I went to night school in Hackensack, New Jersey. I swear he cheated the entire time, by the way, but we passed. The old redneck joke that you're redneck when you and your father walked to school, but you're in the same grade. I lived that dream with my father in Hackensack, New Jersey. Now, right after I got here, we landed on the moon the next year. Remember that in 1969, and this is going to sound really stupid, but there was a show called I Dream of Jeannie at the same time. Remember, right?
Mhm.
The
Yeah,
astronaut guys, good looking blonde, wearing a harem outfit. It fit even when I was 9 years old, 10 years old.
right.
So right then and there, my first aspiration was to be an astronaut, and then I started to read more about aviation. And before I got to high school, it was I wanted to be a fighter pilot in the worst way. It was just one of those things, everything from the Red Baron to the World War II guys, Pappy Boynton in the Marine Corps. That history just spoke to me. And so I applied to the Air Force and to the Navy. I didn't know what the Marine Corps was other than they looked a lot meaner than I was. And I didn't think I was cut out to be a mean guy. Go figure. And so I did receive a Navy scholarship. And as soon as I got there, the Navy said, "You're too ugly to be a sailor. Go join the Marine Corps," or words to that effect. And then I switched right away. So it was a childhood dream come true at 18, which is not normal, and most people don't have that pleasure of seeing their dreams come true so quickly.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. But you did go to college first before joining the Marine Corps, or is that, yeah?
Yeah, I went to college on an ROTC scholarship.
Oh, okay.
So it was Navy scholarship first, Marine Corps within about a month or two, and I never looked back.
So you obviously flew, I'm going to assume, from Germany to New Jersey when you immigrated over.
Yeah.
Had you been in a plane much as a child?
No, none. That was the first ride. It was a 707 charter. I think it broke down 10 times between Frankfurt and JFK.
Oh,
I
geez.
know we landed in Scotland and we landed in Maine for some things, and then we finally ended up landing at JFK. But that was my first exposure to airplane flying.
So you're living your childhood dream. You joined the Marines. What was your kind of career progression like there? And I know you've served in active duty too. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I was commissioned in 1980. I graduated in 3.5 years. Not that I was an overachiever, but I was dying to get commissioned and get out of college. Which is, by the way, for those who are listening who are 18, don't do that. Stay in college for 4 years and enjoy it. Because after you graduate, life gets serious. You actually have to work for a living at that point. Right?
Exactly.
But college was great. A good leadership experience. I'm going to talk about that later. But I joined the Marine Corps, and I had an aviation contract and a regular commission. You need to get a reserve commission or a regular commission out of college. And because of my contract at the time, this is 1970, I commissioned in 80. I knew that I was going to be a pilot, or at least go to flight school, and I had a regular commission. So I left there. Every Marine gets to spend 6 months in Quantico, Virginia, at something called the Basic School as a second lieutenant. And it is a leadership academy. You really learn how to be an infantry officer, which is what every Marine Corps is. Every Marine is a rifleman, and every Marine officer is an infantry officer. But I was there to fly airplanes. I love TV. I love being out in the woods, getting ticks everywhere, and digging holes to sleep in the night. I enjoyed it. Most of it was I knew that I wouldn't have to do it for the rest of my life because that's hard work. My son did that for a couple of years as a Marine infantry officer, but I knew that I was leaving there, so it was fun and a good experience for leadership. Flight school was fun. I did okay in flight school, not great, but I got lucky enough to get jet grades, so I went to jets. And then from jets, my dream was the F4 Phantom. Remember that thing? Kind of a gull-winged, mean-looking brick with two engines. There's a lot of funny stories there, but I ended up getting F4. So trained in the F4, a short time in the F4 in Beaufort, South Carolina, which is about to get hit by another hurricane. And then I went to an adversary A4 squadron. Back then, we were still fighting the Cold War, so we were doing Soviet airplane, Soviet tactics. And I went to fly the A4 as an adversary. If you remember the movie Top Gun with Tom Cruise, the first one,
Yep.
the little tiny airplanes that the Top Gun guys flew were
The MiG.
A4s.
Okay.
Right, the MiG simulator.
Yeah.
And then the black MiG, the black airplanes were actually F5s, also simulators. So I flew A4s for a while. Great experience. Went to Top Gun in 1986, right at the tail end of the movie being made. Some really funny stories there that I can't say on this podcast for a number of reasons, but it was fun. And then after a year of flying 500 hours, which is a lot of hours in the A4 as an adversary, went to the F-18. F-18 instructor, back to what we call a gun squadron, a fleet squadron to Desert Storm. About 45 combat missions in Desert Storm, lots of bombs, lots of rockets, lots of bullets out the front end. And then a series of other jobs. Air officer with a Marine regiment, which is normal for the Marine Corps. Back as a major to the F-18. Command and Staff College, my first master's degree, which was interesting. And then I went to what I call the intelligence community, and I worked out of Frankfurt, Germany, did a lot of trips to the former Soviet Union on a diplomatic passport, looking around. And so I can't go to Belarus, I can't go to Russia. That would be a bad thing for me. Spent a year almost in Sarajevo and in the Balkans after the war, doing some work. Left there, Went to Yuma, Arizona to be a support squadron commander, flew the F-5 again. And then from there went to, was selected for colonel, went to the Air War College, the Air Force's War College in Maxwell, Alabama, and taught there for 2 years, and then got lucky enough to be picked up for command as a colonel and commanded an aircraft with multiple squadrons here in Fort Worth, of all places. So I full circle to the cowboy story. Literally came back to Fort Worth, took command, and the F-18 squadron in my command was a friend of mine from Desert Storm, and he owned a ranch just a mile west of where I live now, which is why I bought this place. So all things come to those who wait, right? I went from
I love it.
living my dream as a fighter pilot to now living on my old man's dream as a cowboy and rancher.
I know you can't reveal it. There's some kind of Top Gun story, but did you get in a fight with Tom Cruise and had decided non-disclosure because you beat him up?
No, I did not. But I think some folks wanted to. And that's all I'll say. But I will say this: the after the movie was done, Top Gun was in a fight with the studio because they painted all their F-5s black, and the studio swore that it was a water-based paint, and it wasn't. And so the studio had to pay for repainting all the Top Gun F-5s. Probably had 14 of them in their various adversary colors because black wasn't a good color for back then in the early 80s.
That's good. So you leave the Marine Corps after 27 years, and you want to start this civilian professional career, right? So let's say you're a year. You can name the time frame. Whatever that time frame is. What was the biggest surprise or hardest adjustment to civilian professional life for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. To frame that discussion, I had aspirations to be a general officer, and then that got dashed asunder. In 1987, I had an experience in F-18 where I went from negative G, which is being light in your seat, almost like at the top of a roller coaster going down, about negative 2 Gs, to a positive 10.5 instantaneously while looking over my shoulder, twisted in the seat. So let's just do simple math. So let's say I weighed 200 pounds. I weighed a good deal more than that. With the equipment, probably more like 250. Times 10.5, when you're not sitting straight up, it's not good for your neck and back, right? So I was part of a 2,400 milligram Motrin club for about 2 decades.
Wow.
And yeah, which doesn't do well from your stomach. So in 2007, early, I had a similar episode where I lost control of my hands. My hands were numb, flying in the airplane, doing this almost the same kind of thing. And my flight surgeon gave me a double secret probation MRI, right, so that the result wouldn't be known until I said okay. And he came into my office and said, "Hey, Skipper, you can either fly or you can carry grandkids. You can't do both." And I talked to him a little about the details, and he said, "No kidding. If you don't watch it, you're going to be crippled." So I threw in the towel, so to speak, and we put in for retirement earlier than I intended to. So the good news was for those 2 years in Fort Worth, I was a senior Marine in Texas, which doesn't mean much other than it's still a line on my resume, but it allowed me to do a lot of public speaking. And so I got into an investment bank, and the shock was, and it's funny. One day I am a senior colonel of Marines with a car and a driver, and a month later I'm picking up somebody at the airport in my own car because I am the car and the driver. Right.
Right.
Quite the change. And then the other thing is, and this is where self-awareness becomes so important as a leader. I thought I was self-aware, but I also thought, well, damn it, I was a colonel of Marines. Now, to be honest, that may not mean much, but there aren't very many of those, and very few of those become commanders. So I was in a pretty rarefied world, and I thought I could do just about anything. And to be honest with you, Jeff, I didn't know jack about business. I knew about leadership, and I knew about organizational health, and so I could go into any organization, and still can. Within about 2 hours, 3 hours, I can tell you most of the things that are wrong just by walking around, because they're obvious.
Right.
But I didn't know anything about investment banking. I didn't know anything about finance. So I was always in the corner with the dunce hat on, trying to learn, and in a world that didn't teach. There was no training. There was, it's like the old ninja plans in Japan that throw the babies in a pond. If the baby comes up and swims, they're good. If not, who cares?
Right.
Right? So that was a tough awakening, and the fact that I needed to reinvent who I was and relearn things. I've always been a lifetime learner and a lifetime teacher, but that was a shock to my system on how ill prepared I was for that specific world. Now, someplace else, I probably would have been an easier fit. The good news, though, is that it took me out of my comfort zone. It put me in a pressure cooker, and there's only two ways to you either get crushed or you succeed in some capacity. And I would like to think that I succeeded.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. What was your kind of process to learn the investment banking industry?
Observation, questions, study. I mean, I took the Series 7's exam, and I remember the rest of the crew being upset because I went off grades that they had in the firm. And then just reading and observing and understanding. And to my fortune, I ended up doing consulting for them. They had a portfolio company that was kind of in trouble. And so I did some consulting, looking around and seeing what the problems were. And so what I realized was, okay, I have a lot to learn about business, but I can go into an organization and tell you what's wrong, and almost like an intelligence officer looking at Soviet Union stuff. Right? You go, okay, I know what's wrong here. There's no maintenance, there's no leadership, they don't have a plan. All the things that I'm doing now at ExecHQ, particularly for ExecHQ Multiple, a pre-transaction service, I learned there because it's so easy to figure out where you have problems. And the biggest problem is leadership, really understanding what it is. And it's something that isn't taught well. And this is going to be probably piss some people off out there, is that it's not taught in the civilian world. Not really.
Right.
And what is amazing to me is that I've read a lot of civilian books on leadership, and I've talked to a lot of civilian professors about leadership, and almost all of them haven't led anything. Even some of the guys who have the biggest leadership books, I won't mention any names, but haven't led anything. And so one of the things is looking at an organization and understanding what the impact is of poor leadership and or poor management. And as a good leader, you have to do both, and figuring out how to fix that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I never really had that take on leadership because it is amazing how many people get promoted. They were so good as an individual contributor, and then they just get thrown to the wolves. I have a very close friend started a new job, and it's a very big company, probably Fortune, 50, and I'm amazed at the leadership, lack of, just micromanaging people, and
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's the '80s, '90s, in terms of, that type of leadership style. And, I've talked to several guests on this topic, and, and things have to change, but, the foundation doesn't have to change. But, like Steve Jobs today would probably have a hard time running Apple because of the way he led, but that doesn't mean he was a bad leader. He was right for his time. But I think it's because of you're not getting coached, and just because you're a visionary doesn't mean you can lead people. I mean, they obviously did great things for Apple, but he failed. They fired him the first
Right,
time.
right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And again, I'm sure, I know there are great civilian leaders, and all of them have two things in common. I think there's a kernel of leadership. I don't mean the rank, a kernel nugget of leadership that you're given by birth and circumstance, and the nurturing of parents, and things like watching John Wayne movies, quite frankly. And then there is a whole bunch of learning that has to take place, right? And all of that has to be underpinned by a really strong sense of who you are as a person, by seeing yourself as a leader, by emulating leadership examples. And then by having a set of core values, way back when, before we had core values, but we didn't call them that. It's just a principle of how you live. And I think a lot of the folks that are not good leaders just got into a position, whether they have the kernel or whether they have the training or even the ethos and values to be a leader, are thrown into positions where they can't really perform well, but are just there and succeed despite themselves.
So you obviously go through 27 years in the Marine Corps, where that's what they do. They develop leaders, right? So you learned a ton from the Marine Corps. But what outside of your Marine Corps experience, what guided you the most in terms of your leadership journey and your learning?
Yeah, two things. One, a lot of learning, a lot of reading, everything, history. You can learn a lot from historical figures. One of my favorite is certainly, there are military folks out there that are really, really good. Churchill is a great example of leadership under stress. And then there is the thing that I call faking it till you make it. That is picking an example for yourself of what you want to be when you grow up. And I'm still, by the way, not grown up yet, so I still have a ways to go. But figuring out what the example is, and it could be a fictitious character, it could be a historical character, but who's your example of who good leaders? And it could be people that you work with and work for. I have lots of those. I was told a long time ago to have a leadership notebook. It's basically one of these things like I have here, and it all the good examples and bad examples of leadership are documented. And learning from bad leaders is just as good as learning from good leaders. You learn what not to do, and then you learn what to do. And if you underpin it with some characteristics, then I think you can do it. And so that's the military part. The other part of it is leadership is leadership. Good leadership, or even great leadership, is the same. I don't care what age. I don't believe on this generational change. No, I really don't. I've led young Marines for 27 years, and now I've led several companies with young and old in between, and everybody needs the same kind of leadership. They need a leadership that is based on character, on competence, and on composure, and a caring for the people that you lead. Right. And one of the things that the Marine Corps says, and I believe in it, it's mission first, but people always. Meaning, unfortunately, in the military, sometimes you have to tell people to do something to make it to kill, and that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. And in business, you still have to make really tough decisions, but the mission comes first. If it doesn't, then why do it? Why be in business? Why be in the military? But in order to accomplish that mission, you have to take care of your people. There has to be a level of humanity and empathy and caring, not carrying them. There's a difference. Not carrying their people, but caring for them and their families and their future. And the best leaders I've ever seen were teachers, mentors, and coaches rolled up in whatever position they held. Because your number one rule, I think, responsibility as a leader is developing other leaders. And that is not often done in the business world, not at a formal level, nor even at an informal level. And there's lots of coaching programs out there, and I've seen it done poorly, I've seen it done pretty well, but the deliberateness of that has to come from the top, and it has to be forced downhill. And the senior person, and now that I am, no kidding, almost a senior citizen, I am the senior person, and it has to come from that individual, CEO or commander in the military, and force that down people's throat. Where that if you're a leader, if your title, if your position has a leadership nuance to it, well, then you better be a teacher and a coach and a mentor and help the other folks out. If you can't do that, then you don't belong in leadership. You can be a manager. People manage things and programs. Leaders lead people. And there's a whole big difference. A great leader, I think, does both. Right? It's the old Drucker thing. Right? You do the right thing, so you do things right, and you do the right thing. Two different concepts, but great leaders do both.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. What, like in companies you've led, after the Marines, what was your process or things that you implemented to develop your leadership throughout the company?
A number of things. First thing is coaching and mentoring of subordinate leaders, and literally taking them under your wing, and figuring out what they need. The first thing I ask anybody, okay, Jeff, you work for me, right? Jeff, you're not, I've old Joe, you're actually 25 or 30. I go, hey, Jeff, tell me what you want to do when you're 40 or 45. What's your 5-year plan? And what I normally hear is, even today, what do you mean? Haven't you thought about what you want to do when you grow up? No. Do you have a 5-year plan? No. Then you develop that for your people, whether it's education, whether it's financial, whether it's, what do you want to have my job someday? Those kind of things. That's one thing. The second thing is holding people accountable. And I'll give you a quick war story. I was chief operating officer for a company that was a portfolio company of the investment bank that I started with when I left the Marine Corps. And we had a theft in a location with like 30 locations, about 350 employees. And it was out in the West someplace. And the lead sales guy and the store manager were taking products from the store, high value products, multiple thousands of dollars products, and selling them black on the black market. And I went in with the HR director, and because I used to do JAG investigations, Judge Advocate Corps investigations in the military, all officers do. I went through a little investigative process, and it didn't take very long for me to call the police, have them come by, and this sales guy and the manager were not only released but also arrested the same day. And while I have a pretty good sense of humor, and I've gotten a lot more patient than I was when I was in my 30s, if you irritate me, and frankly, if you piss me off, and that pisses me off, things are not going to go well for you. And so after I got my blood pressure down to normal, I wrote core values and a code of conduct for the company. Very military-like. In the Marine Corps Navy, it's honor, courage, commitment. I think here with honor, commitment, and service or something, I changed a little bit. But the bottom line is that became our mantra. Now, I'm not a big fan of core values just for core value's sake. But when you have an example, and then you set the standards, and you hold people accountable, I believe you create a self-cleansing organization. And I know that I did it as Lieutenant Colonel Command in Yuma, where I had a really bad situation with 900 Marines and sailors that were all non-deployable crooks. Not all of them, but a lot of them were. And I put a lot of kids in jail because they need to be in jail. And I had a death threat on me and my family. And you can't make this stuff up. It's serious stuff. Holding them accountable, and what happens over a period of time, I normally think it takes a year to 18 months. You hold the line on whatever it is. And for me, it's you don't cheat, you don't steal, do anything harassment-wise, no sexual harassment, none of that, no drugs. If I see it once, if I hear it once, you're gone that day. End of story. There is no more discussion. You're gone. If I'm leading the organization, you're toast. And if it's criminal, I'm going after you. And then I'm going to set that standard. And what happens over time is that the people that are around the company that think along those lines stay, and they perform really well. And then when somebody comes in that it's a bad apple, they get pushed out because they get uncomfortable with being held accountable. And then they leave by themselves, or they get forced out by their peers, and all of a sudden you have a self-cleansing. Yeah. That is magic. But it's only magic if you actually do it and have frankly, the guts to look at somebody and say, hey, Billy Bob, you're gone. And guess what? This is what we saw. Here's the videotape. And you know the rest of the story. Most people turn a blind eye. If you do that, you're not part of the solution anymore. You're part of the problem. And as a leader, you just fail. You're done.
Yeah, because people know what's going on, and they're saying, "Why is this person still here?" Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. Culture has to start at the top. I mean, you can create mini cultures within a company, and obviously we're talking about companies of certain sizes, but really it starts at the top, at the CEO level, right? And I'm just amazed at like every company should be on the best companies to work for list, right? I mean, that would be your desire. You want to create an
Absolutely.
environment, a community of people at your company where they can create an environment where they can work and thrive, right? But what's lacking at the senior leadership, and I'll say the CEO level, where companies with great cultures are in the minority?
Yeah, good point. There's a book called The Substance of Leadership, written by a guy named David Robinson. His call sign's Crusoe, and he's now a retired colonel. He's a couple years, in fact, several years younger than I am. He joined my F-18 squadron in California right after we got back from Desert Storm as a young lieutenant. He was brilliant as a lieutenant. There are very few brilliant lieutenants, by the way. Most of them are devil and dirt. He was not. And he ended up having a successful Marine Corps career. He was the executive officer at Top Gun. In fact, he is still, in my opinion, the best F-18 driver the Marine Corps has ever had. He's an amazing guy. Now, he's been consulting since he retired. I think he lives in Beaufort, South Carolina, but he wrote this book, Substance of Leadership. And this construct, it comes from that book. And when I read it 2 years ago, I think when it came out, I was floored with the simplicity. So what does it take to be a great leader? And it's what I mentioned earlier, but going in passing. And picture an equilateral triangle. The top of the triangle, the apex, is character. And so that's honor, courage, commitment, certainly, ethical underpinnings, humanity, humility, self-awareness, honesty, integrity, all those things. But it has to be based on a basic principle of good instead of even nothing or bad. And good character that has the moral courage. There's two courages, right? There's physical courage, picture gunfire, you charging a hill, and there's moral courage where you do the right things even when nobody's looking. And there's a whole 2-hour discussion about what that means. Mm-hmm. But if a leader doesn't have that, they've already failed, and the organization will fail. I'll give you an example. Was Adolf Hitler a good leader? He was an effective leader for a while, but he was evil. He had no character. Same frankly, with Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. I know too much about him from visits to his country. That guy is a crook. He is a no-kidding evil dude. Now, is he an effective leader? Well, we can question it, but he's been in power for 20 years. He's done something okay. But they lack character. And those situations, the organization will always perish because the leader is crooked. The next thing on the corner is competence. And that's that manager and leader together, doing things right and doing the right things together. That means you have to know what the hell you're doing. And you have to know enough to know when you don't know. For example, Baron, while I was pretty good in math in college, I don't do finance. I can read a P&L, I can read the balance book. But if I go to a company as a consultant, which I'm doing now, obviously, I always look for a CFO to help me out. I'm not competent in that area, but I have my own competence. And then lastly is composure. I have seen way too many senior leaders lose their cool, become loud, abusive, even physical at work, or get so depressed, or get overly overjoyed about something that isn't really that important, or buckle under stress. If you can't stay cool under pressure, you don't belong in leadership position. You just don't. Nobody wants to see the leader crumble or lose their cool, right? So those three need to be on top. And if you don't have all three, you're going to be that guy in a Fortune 100 company or less that is struggling because he doesn't have, or she doesn't have. Right? And then it's the understanding as a senior leader, you have two jobs, and really it's two jobs. One is build a vision for the company. People come to work for you because of their vision. And that isn't just in 5 years, you want to have $1 billion and blah, 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 be in this line of business. I'm talking about the vision for what we're trying to do, the bigger picture. And that includes the culture for the company and having a sense of belonging. I mean, and this is another one of those Winkle lessons. The biggest PR machine when I was in my younger days was the Marine Corps, because you could recognize, right? I mean, you see the Eagle Globe anchor behind me. You saw the billboards, the guys fighting the dragon with the sword. You saw the commercials. You knew what a Marine was, and you knew what that belonged to, and you knew what they stood for right from the very get-go. Southwest Airlines used to have that same kind of feel. They've gotten a little squishy, but that happens over time if you're not watching. Set the vision, and then set the culture, and the culture better match the vision. And that's where people fail, not recognizing that at the top, at the CEO level, at the chairman level, at the owner level, that's your responsibility. And if you can't do that, again, you're in the wrong place. I'm an introvert. I am a closet introvert. I find strength and power by being by myself or with my wife or with my animals. It's just a fact. Now, I also like helping people, though. So this is fun for me. But public speaking is a slog. Being on stage, which where you always are as a leader, is a little bit of a stress position for me. But you got to get out there and communicate. And so, vision, culture, the triad of character, competence, and composure. And then lastly is you got to be able to communicate and get people to follow you by you setting the vision and then acting in accordance with that vision and that culture. But here's what happens. You set a core value, you write the mission, vision statements and all that stuff, and then you don't live by it. And you know this as well as I do. If you're in a C-level position in any company, I don't care if it's $100 million or $10 million mom and pop shop or a multi-billion dollar multi-nation corporation, you're in a glass house the entire time. And everything you do is observed by everybody. So if you're a shyster, or if you're a crook, or if you're got ethical issues, but you preach from the pulpit about our culture and our goodness and then act not according, you're already done. And the culture is going to fail. The company is going to fail because of it.
Yeah, I worked at a small company. There was probably less than 40 people at the headquarters location. We had people out in the field, but the culture was a little dysfunctional at the headquarters location, and literally in our break room, which was very small where the coffee was, on the bulletin board had a quote from Peter Drucker. It's one of my favorite quotes. It says, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
For breakfast, exactly.
I used to laugh every time I'd walk in, get coffee, and I'd laugh. I'm like, who really put this up here? Like it's like they have no clue.
In this place?
Well, it is just funny because we try to. I was in this sales and marketing organization, and if you ask any sales rep out in the field that would occasionally come into the headquarters location about they would say, "Oh, this is the best company I ever worked for," because we made our own culture and isolated them from the kind of the shit, I guess that,
right.
that we were
right.
feeling. But what you should do, right? You want them to have an environment where they can do their best work and have fun, and so it was successful. But just at the corporate office, it was just like. Literally every day I would look. I'm like, it's so interesting.
And to your point, Jeff, that's a great point. It's something that needs to be recognized. Leadership is not a position. Leadership is an action and an attitude, and a willingness to put yourself out there. And to your point, I was in an F-18 squadron where the commanding officer was a complete dirtbag, and not somebody that you would want to have a beer with, not somebody that you want to introduce your wife to. It was toxic. But we had a core of captains in the squadron. They were all relatively senior, experienced captains, a lot of flight time, and we ran the squadron. We ran the squadron around the commander because we set the culture. We were the culture. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're in a toxic environment at work, and you're not in a C-suite, then you've got two choices. You can either walk. Well, three choices, I guess. You can walk, you can sit there and take it, or you can be the leader and ensure that your peer group is taken care of and can work and be successful despite the fact that leaders suck.
Yeah, it's like I said, it amazes me. I love the corporate culture and making a great one. It just amazes me on the lack of really great companies to work for. I just think it's sad for that's the time period we live in. And there are great companies, right? But it's just
absolutely
they're the minority, unfortunately.
Yep.
So yeah, what was your most fun job after the Marine Corps? What did you enjoy doing out of all? Because you did many different things.
Many different things, lots of president and CEO positions, all that. I like being in charge, and that's that's an ego speaking still, I think. I like being the CEO because I like the vision and culture thing. I
Yeah.
mean, I, I won't say I was born to it, but certainly I've got a long apprenticeship at being that guy. But what I really like doing, and I like doing it in the military and I like doing it now, which is why I'm with ExecHQ, is I like teaching and I like coaching. I love seeing people flourish with a little bit of help, a little bit of leadership, a little bit of coaching. And that's why, one of the things that I do for ExecHQ is that I help run the coaching program. And now I kind of came up with another title. We've talked about it, the chief of staff or higher kind of deal, where, and I'm doing it for a couple of companies where I do the coaching and I help them form the culture and the leadership culture if they can't see it themselves. And I do planning and execution for them. I do whatever. But that to me is more like I'm the graybeard. I am Gandalf from the Lord of the Rings teaching the hobbits, right? I mean, but that sounds stupid, but that's kind of, and I've had a lifetime of experience, and I can go, okay, look, here's what you really got to think about, and it sticks because I'm gray and I'm old, and people tend to listen to that, and that's what I enjoy. If I can't be in charge, which I don't think I really wanted that responsibility anymore, because I like my free time, but boy, I love teaching and I love helping people succeed.
Yeah, I love your concept of this chief of staff. Now, before you and I chatted about it during several discussions we've had, I always thought of that role as kind of the a place where it was almost a learning role to give somebody with very high potential in leadership, exposure at the executive level, multiple functions, but but that person didn't have a ton of experience. They're obviously high potential. Your peers with the COO, the CFO, the CMO, CRO, CIO,
Right.
whatever acronym we could throw out there. But you kind of take it as like I'm I've done all these things. I have 42 years of leadership experience. There's probably almost nothing I haven't seen before. Let me help you navigate this across functional areas and culture and help you, raise your game based on my
Absolutely.
experience. Yeah. So I
Absolutely.
really, I love that concept.
I talked to one guy that was going to join ExecHQ, and he mentioned it. And I thought about what I do when I went with the client. It occurred to me that's what I do. I mean, it doesn't really matter what the client is. I end up doing that just out of the experience set. And it works. I think a lot of companies need that. And it's like having a coach and a mentor officially for the entire company. That's one. And then two, there's certain things that you and I and others in ExecHQ can teach those guys. And for a number of things, it's that vision and culture discussion, right? This is your job, dude. Figure it out, or lady, figure it out. And then it's also, and this goes outside the leadership deal, but not really. It's in the competence realm of leadership. That is learning how to plan and execute well. I have talked to Harvard professors. I've talked to professors at Tulane and a number of MBA programs, and their vision or their version of strategy teaching is so ridiculously stupid. I'm sorry to say it, but it's dumb. It has nothing to do with strategy. Strategy is figuring out how to use your available resources to accomplish the mission. That's strategy in a nutshell. 99% of people out there don't know how to do it well. So you tie that into the chief of staff position, and now not only you're mentoring and coaching, you teach them how to plan and execute, and before long you become irrelevant. And the sad news is that within 18 to 24 months, I work myself out of a job, and if I don't, then I'm doing it wrong, because again, it's about developing the next leader,
Right.
and you hope that you can impart some of the knowledge, if not wisdom, and get them on the right track.
Now, on your coaching, is it just kind of the Baron, what you've learned in the past, or do you use a certain methodology? There's so many assessments people use today. I'm just wondering what kind of
Yeah,
your process
yeah.
is.
No, Have you spoke to John Boggs yet? The other Marine Colonel at ExecHQ.
I've been in like 2 meetings with John. That's about it.
Yeah,
Not.
John's a great guy. He's an infantry officer, taught at I think it was the National War College, and then he went to George Mason and for coaching. And he coaches a lot of general officers or flag officers in the military, a lot of senior civilian leaders in politics and in business. And John learned coaching not only from his 30 years in the Marine Corps, but also from his college degree. And so he is probably, I'm sure he's a better coach than I am in terms of process. But I coach from experience, and I coach from having spent now what it is now 40 plus years in coaching. I mean, when you're a pilot, you teach other pilots, you coach other pilots how to fly the airplane. That's what you do 99% of the time. The 1% we actually getting shot at and dropping bombs is a minority, right? The rest of the time you're training. And then in the Marine Corps, if you're a pilot, you also have a ground job in maintenance or in operations or in logistics, wherever. And you have troops, junior enlisted Marines that work for you. And it isn't giving orders. I mean, that's the stereotypical military leadership example. But you give orders, but that's a rarity. What you do is you help them, you coach them, and you develop them as Marines or as leaders. And the same holds true in business. So all of that allows the coaching to take place. And what I do is and I don't know if the process, there's something that I've developed over the years. I ask them some very simple questions. What do you want to do when you grow up? I don't mean that in age. I mean that in you're established, you've got a family. What's your life goal? And then plan backwards. Everything is backwards planning in the military, and it needs to be the same way from business and life. So if at 55 you want to retire with $5 million, a nice house, and you're married and have 2 kids, if that's your vision for your life, then plan backwards. And now you're 30. How do you get there? And what do you need to do to develop yourself as a human being? That's the first step. And then being a little bit of planning execution, because most of them, in fact, all of them are business leaders. And then finally, it's you step back as a coach and you become a coach. You let them execute. And then let's say it's you, Jeff, and you're 30 years younger, and you come back and go, Baron, I got this problem with this one guy, and he's a friend of mine, but he's not performing. What do I do? And I go, Jeff, well, tell me about this guy. And did you set the expectation? Well, no, not really. Okay. So let's talk about that. Let's set the expectations of what that job is, and then has he or she the training and the experience to get the job done, right? And then and then you let them as a coach come to the right conclusion. And if they don't, you give them a nudge, a little other input now and then, but you let them. So my program is 9 months long minimum. That's the commitment. It's heavy up front, and then it kind of, I won't say it peters out, but it gets less and less intense, less and less frequent. Because in the first, I need to teach them what they don't know. I do a little bit of an assessment on my own, what I think they know. And then I develop them as best I can, and then I let them execute, and then they come to me with problems, and we sort it out, but I let them come to conclusions. That's what a coach does. I mean, I can teach all day, and that's helpful, but it doesn't help the development of the executive after 9 months. Some people stay longer, some people drop off in 9 months, but in that 9 month window, I have the time frame to make an impact. And then for me, it's so gratifying. You've been there as well. Somebody you coached, whether it's as an official executive coach for hire, or they work for you someplace else, and you help them along, and then 10 years later, they call you again and ask advice or thank you or whatever. What a great feeling that is. Right? I mean, we all want to be appreciated, but what a great feeling it is that whatever you did, whatever nugget you imparted, helped them become something else, something greater.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's 2 groups I'd love to help during leadership advice from great people like you, Baron. First group is a recent college graduate as they're trying to get their career started. And I think based on my experience of teaching at University of Kansas and just my adult children's friends and themselves, I would say you're in the minority. You knew you wanted to be a fighter pilot, but I would say the vast majority do not. What advice would you give them as
Right.
they begin their career journey?
What I've done with a lot of folks is do a little self-awareness evaluation. Right? And it doesn't matter if they're just out of college, although that population needs guidance, needs a little bit of help. And I would say, okay, Jeff, let's say you're 20 years old, you're a junior in college. And I would go, okay, tell me who your heroes are. Who are your role models? Who do you pattern yourself after? Okay? If they're married, I would ask them to talk to their spouse and say, ask your wife or your husband what you remind them of in terms of a hero figure or any kind of figure, right? And then come back to me, and then the answer there gives me an indication of their personality. Was it if they see themselves as the stable boy in the mansion shoveling horse manure? Now, okay, that's one side of an equation. If they just see themselves as the greatest World War II fighter ace, well, that gives me a whole lot of ego sense. And then you can judge where they are. And sometimes the people that don't see themselves as particularly capable or don't have a great sense of self value can be coached up. Rarely can it be coached to the highest level. But I think you need to have that sense of self awareness and self value and see yourself as something beyond what you are now. To have that, the gumption and the guts and the drive and the ego to be a CEO or be whatever.
Right.
Recognize and give you a perfect example. I had a guy that worked for me back in Marine Corps. He was a good guy, a good pilot. I sent him to the Top Gun. I sent him to the Marine Corps Weapons School. He became the pilot training officer for the squadron. Talented guy. And I remember going in to the ready room as a major, and he was a mid-range captain, and I had a difficult day, and you could tell I'm a difficult day. My eyes turned red, and I start going fangs. I'm not a happy camper. And we're talking about working. He goes, Baron, I know what you want to be. You want to be a squadron commander and go higher. I don't want to work as hard as you do. Ding, ding, ding. Right? Self-awareness bell. Now that guy became an airline pilot, and he's got a great life, and he lives someplace in the Northwest, and he's doing fine. But having that awareness is critical. Right? If you're going to do X, you want to be the best of the best, quoting the Top Gun line, or be the CEO of a Fortune 100 company, there's a price to pay for that. There are amazing rewards, but there's a price to pay. And so for the young 18, 20-year-old, for Jeff the younger, tell me who you are. Tell me who you aspire to be. And then let me ask you a question. Are you willing to pay the price? One more example. I was a colonel at the Air War College. I was a senior Marine for the Air Force at the educational deal. And once a month, I would go talk to the brand new second lieutenants in the Air Force, and I would always go in a flight suit, put my feet up on the desk and say, okay, tell me about what you guys doing. And there was a former enlisted guy in there who said, I gave him a little bit of pitch on life as a senior officer. He goes, Colonel, this is all great, but I want to spend time with my kids, and I don't want to miss a softball game. I don't want to miss a baseball game. Blah, blah, blah. And I think there was a lot of whining. And I went, okay, time out. And that's perfectly fine, but then you don't belong in uniform. Right? You don't. I mean, I gave him the sad news. In my son's 18 years at home, I was gone over 9 years. 9.
Yeah.
I rarely saw any games. I did parenting by when we first got laptops. I did parenting by email by bolding and capitalizing my yelling at. Seriously, but that's the price you got to pay. So if you're not willing to put in the work, well, then don't play the game.
Right.
And likewise, the lesson for that young man was, I said, look, would you rather your son remember you at the baseball games, or would you rather your son remember you as somebody who served their country and had a sense of duty to what they were doing? Now, that was kind of shaming him, and I almost felt bad for it, but then again, I didn't. So the lesson to everybody is, if you want to succeed, and I don't care if it's the military or business or politics or whatever you're going to do, there's a price to pay. And so figure out what price you're willing to pay, and that's how high you're going to get.
Right.
As long as you're diligent and develop yourself and learn and apply yourself. And I don't care what generation it is. I mean, there's a lot of talk about this generation, this, that. Hey, you know what? It's all BS. Every human being I've ever met responds favorably to correct leadership and guidance. And if they don't, then they're morally so warped that nothing can help them.
Right. After you start a professional career, at some point, for many of them, they get the team leadership role. So now they have people reporting to them. So while we talked, everybody can be a leader, but now you're responsible for somebody from a org chart, HR perspective, performance reviews, leadership development, those types of things. What advice do you have to that group to improve their leadership capabilities?
Leading peers is the hardest thing you can probably ever do. And you can lead without having a title or position. But if you have a title and position, then you got to be really careful about your relationship with your near peers who are actually now your subordinates. Friendly is good. Being close friends is difficult and can lead to poor decision making on both parties. That's the first thing. Second thing is know what you know and try to realize what you don't know, and don't try to know everything. Good leaders surround themselves with smarter people. So if you're in that position, make sure you ask their advice. Don't give them your orders. Let them help you. The smartest leaders I know are fundamentally lazy. They know how to give direction, sit back and let the other people do the work, and praise them for doing well and take responsibility for things when they go wrong. That's a big statement right there.
Right.
So if you're leading near peers, lead by example, lead with empathy and humility and humanity, and recognize that you have a responsibility to the mission first and people always. You're there to do a job. Do the bloody job and take care of your people, and then hold them accountable. That's the other thing. It's tough to hold accountable people that did 2 days ago were your peers.
Right.
Well, now you got to. And hopefully you did it before to begin with in that self-cleansing culture that I talked about earlier. But now you are the boss, at least one level of supervision above, hold them accountable. But if you do that, here's a trap. Make bloody damn sure you hold yourself accountable first.
Yeah.
Did I give them the expectations? Did I give them the training? Was it reasonable? And if you can say yes, 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 then they're at fault, not you. Fix it.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Baron, thank you so much for coming on the Corporate Couch today. It's been a pleasure. Your career is fantastic, and I'm honored to know you and work with you at ExecHQ.
Thanks, Jeff. That was 2 ways. I appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
Joe, I have to say, I was excited about meeting Baron, but really to interview somebody that born in Germany and learns English in Jersey watching John Wayne movies is just an incredible experience for me. No, I mean, I will say, this is my take on the episode. I mean, I think he gave a mini course in leadership during the conversation. He's that smart, and he, Baron Lukas, 30-year Marine Corps, retired as a colonel, a 1,500 person battalion of fighter pilots. Like, the guy comes in, obviously we don't do the video of the podcast, but he looks imposing on Zoom. He's probably about 6'4", but comes off as a badass. But, I even got him to admit he's a little bit of a teddy bear,
Yeah. And he even said he's a closet introvert. I wrote that down.
Yeah, closet introvert, which I know you bond with. But I mean, just a great story, and I don't know, just really impressive in terms of his leadership. And one thing he said about it too, he said people, no matter what, if you're a millennial, a baby boomer, or a Gen X, whatever, he goes, he believes, and I thought this was an interesting take, that leadership is leadership. And he basically talked about you need to have character, competence, composure, and really have the caring and empathy factor. So I thought it was because he said, I was in charge of people 22 to, 60, and so I just thought it was an interesting take. What was your take with?
And leadership is kind of the secret sauce that fixes everything, and that goes along real well with the observation that I have. What my experience with veterans is that the military seems to prepare you for just about anything that life has. And that's why there are so many veterans that have, I mean, you look at his LinkedIn resume. So he was in the military, and then he was the president of a company, and then the CEO of a company, on the board of a company, and the president of another company, and on and on. It reminds me a lot of one person I worked with very early in my business career, and I won't mention his name because I'm not going to out him, but that he was a retired military, and then when I met him, he was the warehouse manager of the company that we worked for. And I remember thinking at the time, as a young, stupid 25-year-old, that I didn't know anything about leadership or anything. I thought, what is it about the military that prepares you to be a warehouse manager and managing all these people that are doing picking and inventory control and shipping and that kind of stuff? Because he was in charge literally of everything in the warehouse. And I had to finally come to the conclusion after meeting him and a few other military people that the military prepares you for literally anything. And I think that's an interesting aspect. Now, on the other hand, though, that I think this is interesting, and I don't have a good answer for this, is that military people at the same time, higher than average percentage of them suffer from suicide, from mental illness, and from homelessness. And so it's almost like the military takes whatever is inside of you and just tends to multiply it, whatever it is, whether it's a good trait or a bad trait or undesirable trait or something like that. But I think that's interesting that military people can tend to go in either direction, but by a great margin, they will tend to be much more successful than the average.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, just phenomenal. And I'm doing some consulting work with Baron right now. He's just a great person. So, what leadership wisdom would you want to give the audience today?
We are going to go to that great philosopher named Creed Bratton, who one time said, "I've been involved in a number of cults, both a leader and a follower. You have more fun as a follower, but you make more money as a leader."
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.